All right, so we'll say good morning, Ludwig Stiefel, zechus Baruch Hashem. Let's continue in Sanhedrin together, begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share, to thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for Tafshin Pehei, the Tilson Family for dedicating all of the Shirim and Drushos this year as a zechus for besuros, tovos for all of Am Yisroel. Our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Kislev, Josh and Becca Friedman, commemoration of the Yahrzeit of Josh's father, Yisroel Yehuda, HaRav Chaim Rephael, Semi Malka Esterson in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Laib ben Aharon HaKohen, Sarah Rachel bas Baruch Avraham, Hinda bas Henech Efrayim, and Naftali Yonah Hy ben Beatrice, Miriam, and Daniel Yigal. Our week of learning sponsors, Bruce Levin and the Merit, in memory of Avital Kala bas Tova Batya, and Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's aunt, Esther bas Zechariah. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in the Chama, all of those who need a refuah shtav and the Kol Cholei Yisrael HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shirei Meretz Hashem bring home our hostages b'shalom and b'karov, and allow our holy soldiers to be successful b'chol maasei yedehem. Those with that, let us begin. A lot to do today. Today's daf is Yud Gimel 13. We are picking up on. We are picking up Am Yisroel Hashem on Yud Beis Amud Beis. On Yud Beis Amud Beis, and we are picking up. I believe we left off 3 lines into the wide lines. Is that correct? Rabbi Shmuel Yehuda Omer Mishra Rabbi Shimon Mishum Shehesei Tzar Lasos Pesach Sheni. So remember again, yesterday we were dealing with the interesting episode of Zechariah. And we're talking about the sugya about whether or not one is permitted to go ahead and cause a leap year because of Tumah. In other words, Klal Yisrael is Tameh. You want to be able to offer up Karban Pesach in a state of ritual purity. Is there the right, the halachic right, or maybe even the mandate to declare a leap year in order to go ahead and ensure that Klal Yisrael offers up the Karban Pesach in a state of Tumah? Machlokes, but interestingly enough, one of the rayas that was brought was Zechariah. Chizkiyo, Melech Yehuda did this, and apparently then asked forgiveness for having done this. So we saw 2 possibilities. Either the mistake that he made is that he created a leap year for the sake of Tumah, or the other possibility that the Gemara advanced at the end of the shir was that he went ahead and he did this. Actually 3 possibilities. Second possibility was he was Ma'aber Chodesh Nisan, he made a second Nisan. Or third possibility was no, he declared the leap year when? On the 30th day of Adar. So he ended up making an Adar Beis, a second Adar, but he did it on the 30th day of Adar. What's the issue with the 30th day of Adar? The 30th day of Adar technically could be the first day of Nisan, and you can only make a leap year in Adar, not in Nisan. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to unwrap this a little bit more. So the Gemara says, so what was Chizkiyo's logic? So Rabbi Ashi could go and show you So what was it? So in other words, it could be the Gemara is trying to just understand some of the mitzias, some of the realities that were existing in this time. So it could very well be that we're dealing with the situation of when you looked at the Jewish male population, half were tamei and half were tahar. V'nashim mashlimos letahorim va'od tovos aleim. And what happened when you then added the women into the tally? So the women tilted the scales in the favor of Tara. In other words, when adding in the women, we'll see what's going on over here. When you added in the women, it turned out that the majority of Klal Yisrael was Tahar. Now it's important. Let's see. So Me'ikara Safar in the beginning, so Chizkiyo thought, Nashim Berishon Chova. So Chizkiyo's logic was like this: women are obligated in Karban Pesach. So because women are obligated on Karban Pesach, therefore, when you count women, so to speak, as part of the population for Tara and Tumah purposes. So therefore, because women are chayiv, therefore again, when you add them into the mix, it turns out that the majority, mi'utan tmein, so the majority were tahar, only a minority of Klal Yisrael was tamei. Now what happens when the minority is tamei? So what happens when the majority is tahar, the minority is tamei? So what do? Majority does Karban Pesach when? First Pesach. Minority does Karban Pesach, Pesach Sheni. Olabasof Savra, but in the end he changed his mind and he said, Nashim Berishon Rishos. Perhaps women by the first Karban Pesach are not obligated, but rather again it's only optional. If that's the case, so say, depending on the nature of their obligation, will determine whether or not they are part of the population count for Tumah and Tara purposes. If women are obligated in Karban Pesach, then they're going to be part of the population count to determine is the majority tamei or is the majority tahar. Why does that make a difference? Because if the majority is tamei, everyone does Pesach on Pesach Rishon. Because as we saw before, whether in yesterday's daf, whether you hold Tumah Hutra B'tzibor or Dechuye B'tzibor, right? Whether you hold that, again, if the majority of the population is Tamei, that the laws of Tumah are either dispensed with or just set aside. Either way, if the majority of the nation is Tamei, everyone is doing Karban Pesach on the first Pesach. So again, if women are obligated in Karban Pesach, so then when you add them into the population count, the majority was Tahar. If the majority was Tahar, then those who are Tahar do it on Pesach Rishon. Everyone else does it on Pesach Sheni. But then Chizkiyahu thought maybe not. Maybe women are not obligated on Karban Pesach. If they're not obligated on Karban Pesach, then what? They're not part of the population tally for the purposes of Tumah and Tara. If that's the case, it turned out that the majority of Klal Yisrael was Tamei. If the majority of Klal Yisrael is Tamei, then what? Then everyone does Karban Pesach when? Pesach Rishon. Pesach Rishon. Okay. So the Gemara says, fine. So the point over here is just, there's a lot of machlokes concerning what exactly Chizkiyahu did in that year. One thing is clear. That what did he do? He created a leap year for Tumah purposes. That's what's clear. What exactly he did wrong in that process that he felt that he needed to ask forgiveness, so that is the subject of some controversy. Okay, Gemara goes weiter. Gufa, Amar Shmuel, Ema Arnes Hashon B'Yom Shloshim Shel Adar, Hol V'Roi L'Kov B'Nisan, Nisan Ibura. So the Gemara is Hol V'Roi L'Kov O Nisan. So we saw this in yesterday's, that's what we just said before, that Allah L'Maisa, you cannot declare a leap year on the 30th day of Adar. Why not? Because since technically speaking, the 30th day of Adar could be what? Could be first day of Nisan. Therefore, again, it doesn't work. Ibru Amai. What if he did it? Ibru Amai. Amr Ula in Makach Nesa Chodesh. So Ula said, in that case, we would just not make a formal declaration of the new month. I Kidshumai. What if he did it? Amr Rava Batal Ibar. No, the Ibar doesn't work. Rav Nachman Aram Uber Umakodesh. Rav Nachman says it does work, although it's not ideal. But if you did it, it absolutely works. Amalei Rav Nachman Michti. Let's analyze this. Mi Porya lePescha Tlasin Yomin Havu. So remember again, there are 30 days from Purim to Pesach. Or Mi Porya Dashina B'Hilchos Pesach. And Halacha L'Maaseh again. Remember, there's a concept of Shloshim Yom Kodem Achag. Sholin V'Darsha B'Yon L'Shachag. 30 days before a particular Yontif, we begin the halachos, we begin learning the halachos of that yontif. So therefore, again, Purim is 30 days before Pesach. So 30 days before Pesach. So therefore, on Purim, we already start to learn Hilchos Pesach. Disanya, Sholem Hilchos Pesach, Kodem Pesach, Shloshim Yom. We begin to learn the halachos of Pesach before Purim, or before Pesach, 30 days. Rabbi Shmuel says, Shtei Shavos. Rabbi Shmuel says, no, you don't need 30 days. Rather, you only need 2 weeks. V'chi, Mati Reish Yarcha. Now, if when Rosh Chodesh comes, you're going to go ahead and end up distancing it. There's a concern that what could happen? What could happen is people are going to go ahead and not be fully mindful of the halachos of chametz. Abaye says no. People know that in general, when Chazal have to make a leap year, so it's dependent on a whole bunch of cheshbonos, and therefore the Gemara says Amri. And people will say the rabbis were not able to make that final decision until really the end of Adar. So therefore, the people won't take it as a lack of seriousness about the calendar. Rather, people will understand that the nature of these calculations is that they take some time. Okay? Am Rav Yehuda. Am Shmuel. So I'll say, so now we're going to get into some of the technicalities regarding the calendar. So we'll go through them. So the Gemara says as follows. So Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, we do not go ahead and make a leap year. Now, let me clarify this a little bit. Up until now, we've been focusing on that what drives the need for a leap year is that halacha l'maaseh we need Pesach to fall out in the spring. We're going to see that there's another thing that drives the calendar, which is that Sukkot really has to fall out sometime. We're going to see either right after or right during the autumnal equinox. So therefore, again, if we see that Sukkot is going to fall out during the summer, that's another reason to declare a leap year. Okay, so that's what the Gemara is focusing on over here. So that's the lashon over here. So Rabbi Yehuda said in Shmuel, we do not declare a leap year unless, of course, Ela Imkin Haisat Kufa Chasera Ruba Shel Chodesh. Now, what this literally means is, unless, of course, we see that summertime is going to extend into Tishrei. So if summertime is going to extend into Tishrei, we'll go ahead and we'll declare a leap year. Now, remember, whenever declaring a leap year, what are we declaring? Which month? It's always Adar. Right? In other words, Adar is your only leap month. But if we see already by the way the seasons are going, that ultimately summer is going to extend well into, we'll discuss what well into means, well into Tishrei, we'll go ahead and we'll declare a leap year. This way Sukkot falls out during the autumn. So the Gemara says as follows, Kamaruba, what does it mean that the summer is going to fall out well into Tishrei? How much into Tishrei does it have to fall out? So the Gemara says, Kamaruba Shal Chodesh, Shisha Asam the Rabbi Yehuda. It says 16 days. 16 days, top of your Gimel. Rabbi Yossi says, Echad ve'esrim yom, 21 days. Ushnem mikra echad darshu. And they both paskin, or they both derived their respective shitos from the same pasuk. Chaga asif to kufas hashana. So this is very interesting. Chaga asif, which is Sukkis, must be to kufas hashana, during the season, or during the equinox of the year. Take a look at Rashi. Chaga asif, zman ha'asif shebechag. Dainu cholo shel chag sheyichyeh le'asof bol davar ha'avid. So this is interesting. The Gemara is dashing over here that Chaga Asif Dafka refers, even though Chaga Asif refers to Sukkot, right? Because Sukkot is the harvest holiday. It's time when, in an agrarian society, you're bringing in all of the produce of the field, right? Produce is harvested, let's say around Shavuos time. You leave it out in the field to dry out over the course of the summer. And then Sukkot is when, the Sukkot time is when you're bringing it in to the storehouses before the rainy season. So the Gemara is darshaning over here a little bit interesting that Chaga Asif actually refers dafka to Chalamayid. Right? Because Chalamayid is the time when you would be able to gather things in. You can't do malacha on Yantiv itself, but you can do certain malachas on Chalamayid. So look at Rashi again. Zmana Asif Shebechag, Dahainu Chalo Shamoid, Sheyichyeh La'asof Bol Davar Avid, Hishamer Sheyichyeh B'tekufas Shana HaNichnesas, V'lo B'soch Tekufas Tammuz, Shehi Mishana Sha'avra. Make sure that the Chag Asif Chalamayid is part of the next season, i.e. fall, autumn, and not part of the previous season of Tammuz, which is the summer. Okay. So let's go to the Gemara now. Back to Gemara, then we'll come back to Rashi. Mar Savar Kulei Chag Ba'ina B'Tkufa Chadasha. So one opinion holds that the entire Yom Tov of Sukkot must be in the new season of autumn. Umar Savar Miktas Chag Ba'ina B'Tkufa Chadasha. And ultimately the other opinion says, no, you don't need the whole Yom Tov of Sukkot to be in the fall. Rather, again, you just need part of the Yom Tov of Sukkot to be in the fall. Okay. So the Gemara says, Savri. So what do these two respective opinions hold? Ika Savri Yom Tkufa Gomer. If you hold that ultimately, again, the day of the equinox itself, right? The day of the equinox is the last day of the previous season, but lav hachi namilo. Either way, you're not going to satisfy the criteria. Lo leman damar kulei chag ika, v'lo leman damar miktas chag ika. Then either way, ultimately, again, it's not going to satisfy either of the opinions. Neither the opinion that holds that the entire Yom Tov must be in the new season, or the opinion that holds that part of the Yom Tov must be in the new season. So the Gemara says, Ella kasavri yom tekufa maschil. Rather, what you have to say is both opinions hold that the day of the equinox itself is the beginning of the new season, not the part of the old season. Okay? So the Gemara says, Meisveir is Akasha, Yom Tekufa Gomer Div Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the day of the actual equinox is considered to be the end of the previous season. Rabbi Yossi says, Yom Tekufa Maschil. Rabbi Yossi says, no, not true. The day of the equinox is the beginning of the new season. V'otanya, furthermore we learned, Ein ma'avrin es hashana ela imkin haisa tekufa chasera. Ruba Shel Chodesh. As we said before, the only time we'll declare a leap year is when again, as we said before, that the summer is going to extend into Tishrei in a significant way. Literally means, again, Tishrei is going to be chaser because of summer. how much of summer or how much of Tishrei does summer have to extend into in order to declare a leap year? So in words of V'kama ruba shel chodesh, 16 days. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shtei yodos b'chodesh, 2/3 of Tishrei. V'gam shtei yodos b'chodesh, how much is 2/3 of Tishrei? Chaf yom, 20 days. 20 days. Rabbi Yossi says, Shisha asra lifnei Pesach. So I'll say, so again, interesting enough, Rabbi Yossi's now going back a little bit. Rabbi Yossi says, when will we declare a leap year? I should say, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Mechashvin Shisha asra lifnei Pesach ma'avrin. If we see that winter is going to extend in a significant way into the month of Nisan, we'll also go ahead and make a leap year. And I both say, that's what we're much more familiar with, right? Because remember again, if we see that winter is extending into Pesach, into Nisan, then what's going to happen? Then Pesach is not going to be what? Chag HaAviv. Chag HaAviv. We'll say, so again, just so you appreciate, what's being introduced over here is, interestingly enough, that halacha l'maisa now, the Gemara is introducing us to the idea that seasonal issues don't only affect Pesach, but also affect Sukkos. Sukkos needs to fall out after the autumnal equinox. The shayla just is over here, how much of Sukkos? Is it the entire Yom Tiv? Is it just from Chalamayid and on? But again, what we're being introduced to over here is that halacha l'maisa, if we see that essentially Sukkos is going to fall out during the summer, that would be another reason to declare a leap year. Okay, so now the Gemara is going back to Pesach. So Yossi says, if we see that winter is going to extend into Nisan, we go ahead and we declare a leap year. So the Gemara says, Shisha asr lifnei achag in ma'avrin. But if halacha l'maisa again, it's going to be 16 days before Yom Tov. We don't make a leap year because of that. Rabbi Shimon says, Af shisha asr lifnei achag ma'avrin. Even if it's going to turn out 16 days before the Yom Tov, we still go ahead and make a leap year. So the Gemara says, others say miuto, only if it's a minority. V'kama miuto, or even if it's a minority. What is a miut of the month? Arba asayom, 14 days. To which the Gemara says, Kashya, you're right, that poses a contradiction to the previous aforementioned days. So both say, all of this is just an ongoing machlokes. Essentially, we know we need Pesach to be in the spring. We know we need Sukkot to be in the autumn. So then the shayla just is, if the previous season is encroaching upon the upcoming Yom Tiv, how much encroachment do we allow before we have to declare a leap year? That's this variety of opinions. Amar Mar, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shtei Yodos B'chodesh Esrim Yom. Rabbi Yehuda holds 2/3 of the month, and 2/3 of the month is going to be 20 days. Rabbi Yossi says, Mechashvin Shisha Asar Yom Lefnei Mechashvin. We calculate the following. Shisha Asar Yom Lefnei Pesach Ma'abrin. If it's 16 days before Pesach, then we will declare a leap year. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda. So isn't that the same position as Rabbi Yehuda? Yom Tekufa Gomer Yom Tekufa Maschil Ikabinayu. So I'll say, so no, the point of contention will be what we do with the actual equinox day. Okay, does the equinox day go ahead and complete the following season, or is it considered to be the beginning of the new season? Amar Mar, Shisha Asr Lefnei Achag in Ma'avrin, 16 days before the Yom Tov of Sukkot, we don't have to declare a leap year. El Rabbi Yossi, Shisha Asr Lefnei Achag, Hudlo, Hashivsar, V'timnisar, Ma'avrin, so 16 days no, but 17 and 18 days we will. Well, that's the question. V'hamar Shisha Asr Lefnei Pesach, in B'tzir Lo. But we learned 16, yes, less than that, no. To which the Gemara says, lo, idi ma'avrin. We wouldn't declare a leap year in any of these situations. V'aydi de tana reisha shisha salifnei pesach, tana nami shisha salifnei achag. Just mishnaic symmetry, or brisa symmetry. Since it said 16 days before Pesach, it used that same number ultimately again before Sukkot as well. Rabbi Shimon says, Af shisha asar lifnei achag ma'avrin. Rabbi Shimon says even 16 days before Sukkot, ultimately again they'll declare the leap year. Hainu Tanakama. Isn't that the same position as the Tanakama? Amud Beis, Ikabenayu, Yom Tekufa Maschil, the Yom Tekufa Gomer. So ultimately again I will say, no, the fundamental machlokes once again will be on the equinox day. What's the status of the equinox day? Is it the end of the previous season or the beginning of the new one? And we're not sure who to attribute which opinion to. The Achirim say, Miuto, only the minority. The kama miuto, we'll say what is considered to be the minority of the month. Arba asayom, 14 days. So Ma'ikasavi, what do they hold? Ikasar yom tkufa gomer v'kula chag ba'inan ha'ika. So I'll say if they hold, number one, that the equinox day itself is the completion of the previous season, and you need the entire Yom Tov of Sukkot to be in the autumn, then that makes sense. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Achirim b'tkufas Nisan kaimi. The Achirim are actually talking about, again, Tkufas Nisan, not Tkufas Tammuz. They're talking about the spring, not the summer. The Chsiv, Shamar es Chodesh Aviv, Shamar Aviv shel Tkufa, sheyichyeh b'Chodesh Nisan. Make sure that the spring season is in Chodesh Nisan, and therefore again, do what you need to do to ensure that Nisan is the spring month. And how do you do that? How do you ensure that? Make Adar into a leap year, make a second Adar. Amar Ba'acha bar Yaakov, Tana milamala lemata kachashiv. The Tana ultimately again is going from top to bottom. V'achi kamar, ad miuto ma'avrin. Even if the new season is going to extend only a little bit into the next month, we go ahead and we make a leap year. V'kama miuto, what's a miut? Arba asar yom, 14 days. Ravina Amar li Olam Achirim b'Tishrei kaimi. Ravina says, no, the Achirim are actually referring to Tishrei. They're not referring to Nisan. They're referring to an issue of where the summer is going to extend into Sukkot. V'kasavi Achirim kulei chag ba'inan v'yom tov rishon. So the Achirim hold, as we mentioned before in Amud Aleph, that halacha l'maisa, all of Sukkot must be in the autumn, including Yom Tov Rishon. Yom Tov Rishon Chag HaAsif Ksiv. But I say, how can you say Yom Tov Rishon? I both say, why would you say the first day of Yom Tov of Sukkot needs to be in autumn, in fall? After all, again, what does the Torah say? Chag HaAsif. Remember what we saw before in Amud Aleph? Chag HaAsif is referring to what? Chalamayid, because it's referring to the part of Sukkot where you could do malacha, where you could gather things. When can you gather things? That's Chalamayid. And as you see, that's the only part that needs to be in the autumn. To which the Gemara says, no, it refers to Chag Haba Bisman Asifa. It refers ultimately again to the Yom Tov that comes during the gathering. Which is the Yom Tov that comes during the gathering? Ultimately, again, that's all of Sukkot, even from Yom Tov Rishon. Okay. All right, I know we did it a little bit quickly, but again, the takeaway is that essentially two brand new pieces of information being introduced here. We thought up until this point, really the only thing that ever motivated a leap year was Pesach, right? That ultimately, again, I need Pesach to be Chag HaAviv, because the Torah explicitly says that Pesach needs to be the Chag HaAviv. And now halacha, and therefore again, if you see that winter is extending into Nisan, you go ahead and declare a leap year, and by the Adar base. Now, interestingly enough, a machlokes, how much of winter, or I should say, how much of Nisan has to be encroached by the previous season of winter in order to declare a leap year? Machlokes. New piece of information being introduced over here. Also, there's another piece. When the Torah refers to Sukkot, the Torah refers to Sukkot as Chag HaAsif Tekufas Hashana. So Yom Tov, right? Chag HaAsif, the Yom Tov of gathering, that Sukkot Tekufas Hashana has to be celebrated at the time of the new season. Oh, now Sukkot is also linked to a season. Which season is Sukkot linked to? Autumn, fall. Which means that now Sukkot has to be in autumn, which means that if you see that it's still summertime during Tishrei, you also have to declare a leap year. Now again, when are you declaring a leap year? Only in Adar, back in Adar. So now the shayla is, how much of summer has to encroach on Tishrei in order to declare a leap year? So again, machlokes. That's machlokes. Similarly, which part of Sukkot has to occur during autumn? Also machlokes. Is it the beginning of Sukkot? Is it just the middle chalamayid of Sukkot? Also machlokes. Other piece of information that just came to light is the day of the equinox itself. Is that considered to be the first day of the new season or the last day of the previous season? Also machlokes. So what's the takeaway? What's incredible is you see, we are so not used to these halachas. because we have a set calendar, right? And this has all been figured out from us, by Hillel Hasheni with the Soda Ibra, the secret of intercalation. We saw in Masechus Rosh Hashanah. So just an appreciation to the complexities of the calendar, an appreciation to how much thought had to go into establishing the calendar when this was done month by month. Now let's say, by the way, so what's the Musar Haskell for us? We see how much thought, how much forethought has to go into proper time management, right? The management of the calendar is the paradigmatic example of time management. And if you want to manage your time correctly, what do you see? It's not just about how you're using it now, but it's about forethought about how time is going to be used in the future. Time management requires incredible awareness and mindfulness in the present, but also requires future mindfulness for how and where you're going to use your time in the coming days, in the coming months as well. Incredible. All right, let's go weiter. We're taking a little bit of a sidestep away from that, from the calendar, and a little bit back to the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Smichas Zekenim. So now we're back to the Mishnah. So remember again, back in the Mishnah talked about the concept of Smichas Zekenim. So Smichas Zekenim, the Mishnah said, has to be done by a beis din of, what did the Mishnah say? Smichas Zekenim v'arifas egla b'shlosha de Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'chamisha. So we'll say, so Smichas Zekenim. Now, again, we'll see already what exactly this means. But Bepashtos, let's just say, Bepashtos says the concept as follows. If the Sanhedrin delivers an erroneous ruling, and as a result of that ruling, the Jewish people make a mistake. So, right? But again, it's the Sanhedrin's fault. They issued an erroneous halachic ruling. Klal Yisrael follows their ruling, and it turns out they were wrong. There's a carbon called Par Halam Davar Min HaTzibor, a special carbon, a special sin offering that is brought on behalf of the Sanhedrin and behalf of the people. So we're assuming over here that when we talk about smicha, the Sanhedrin has to do smicha on that carbon. That's what it sounds like we're talking about over here. That has to be done in the presence of a beis din. How big is that beis din? Machlokes. Rabbi Shimon says 3 people. Rabbi Yehuda says 5 people. So now let's analyze. So Tan Rabbanan, v'samchu ziknei, the pasuk says the elders of the court will go ahead. Right? The elders of the court will place their hands, will do smicha. And Rabbi says smicha literally means place, and by the way, smicha is a din in many different karbanos, but it literally means placing your hands on the head of the animal and literally, again, leaning on it, shifting your weight to the head of the animal. So the Gemara says as follows. So, you might have thought that, again, any elders could do this. Get 3 old guys from the marketplace. 3 old guys from the marketplace, let them do smicha, and that would satisfy the criteria. Tamalomar Eida. Therefore, the pasuk says Eida. The pasuk said, now, Eida usually means Sanhedrin. Eida means Sanhedrin. Eida, Yachol, Kitani Eida. So maybe it's Eida, any members of the Sanhedrin will do. You don't need elderly. Talmud Lomar, Ha-Eida, Miyuchadin Shebe-Eida. Therefore, I will say the pasuk when it talks about smicha, leaning on the Par Halam Davar Min HaTzibor, right? Leaning on this special sin offering brought by the Sanhedrin for an erroneous ruling. Who has to lean on it? Ziknei Ha-Eida. Right, the lashon over here, the pasuk of Samchu Ziknei Ha-Eida. So number 1, Zikanim, elders, and Ha-Eida, that's like the definitive article, the Hei HaYediyah. That means it has to be the esteemed, the most chashiv members of the Sanhedrin. The Kamahin, how many people from the Sanhedrin do you need for this process? The Samchu Shnayim, Ziknei Shnayim. So Samchu, they will lean, plural, that's 2. Ziknei, plural elders, that's 2. So that's 4. Ve'in beis din shakol, and you can never have an even number beis din. Mosif alein od echad harikan chamisha de Rabbi Yehuda. So what's the position of Rabbi Yehuda? Samchu 2, Ziknei 2, that gives you 4. Can't have an even number beis din. Add on 1 more, that's 5. 5 members of the Sanhedrin do this smicha. Rabbi Shimon says no. Ziknei shnayim. We just look at Ziknei. Ziknei is 2. Ve'in beis din shakol. You can't have an even number beis din. Mosifin alein od echad harikan shlosha. So again 3. So interesting enough, Rabbi Shimon only darshans Ziknei. Rabbi Shimon only darshans Ziknei. He doesn't go ahead and he doesn't darshan v'samchu. So the Gemara says, "I've Rabbi Shimon haksiv v'samchu." Rabbi Shimon, what about v'samchu? Who should give you another 2? Chomi by the gufei. No. Rabbi Shimon says, no. You can't darshan that. That v'samchu teaches me a halacha. In other words, Rabbi Shimon's perspective is drasha is really only learned out from a word that potentially is extraneous, not necessarily in elongated form, but the Simchu teaches us the actual halacha of smicha. So therefore it's not used for a drasha. Rabbi Yehuda, Ligufei lo tzarech. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need it for a drasha. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need to teach the halacha. Why? The imkain, Tzimar said lo tzarech, the imkain de lo asi, v'samchu l'drasha, lichtov ziknei ha'ir yedehem al rosh hapar. So Rabbi Yehuda says like this. The pasuk could have eliminated v'samchu altogether. What could it have written? It could have just written, the elders of the Eidah, their hands on the par. And I would have understood that. What does that mean? They lean on the par. Therefore, the word v'samchu, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is extra. Because it's extra, we darshan it to teach us another two dayanim. But Rabbi Shimon, iksiv hachi hava amina mai al b'samach. Rabbi Shimon would have said, if the pasuk would have said that without the word v'samchu, I would have thought, what does al mean? Al means that the elders place their hands next to the head of the animal, but they don't necessarily have to put their hands on the head of the animal. Therefore, again, you need v'samchu to teach us that no, the hands actually go on the head of the animal. Rabbi Yehuda, Gamar Rosh Me'olah. Rabbi Yehuda darshans, he makes a drasha or gzer shava of Rosh from Ola. Just like an Ola requires actual smicha, hands on the head of the animal, so too the Parhalim government Atzibur also requires hands on the head of the animal. Rabbi Shimon, lo gamar rosh me'ola. Rabbi Shimon ultimately again does not darshan rosh from ola. So therefore, I will say salach l'maisa fundamental machlokes over here between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda about how smicha is done. Now again, here's what everyone is agreeing with, which is when you bring this unique sin offering, this Parhalim government Atzibur, so it requires smicha from elders of the Sanhedrin. The machlokes is how many elders? Right, so Rabbi Yehuda is saying 5, Rabbi Shimon is saying 3, based on how they darshan the psukim. Okay, so the Gemara says, one second, let's analyze this a bit more. Tana, smicha usmichas zekenim begimel. Both smicha, as well as smicha by elders, has to be done by 3. So the Gemara says, my smicha or my smichas zekenim. So just to point out over here, the Braisa is actually utilizing 2 distinct terms. Smicha and smichas zekenim. So the Gemara says, what's the distinction between smicha and smichas zekenim? Am Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara says, Am Rabbi Yochanan mismach sabi. So this is interesting. So the Gemara says, you're right. Smicha, ultimately again, or I should say, smichas zekenim is the concept that we just saw before about elders of the Sanhedrin leaning on the head of the Parhalim Davar Minat Tzibor. Smicha is actually what we would call ordination. Ordaining rabbis. Rashi says over here, Mismach Sabi, the ordination of elders, Likarye Lahem Rebbe. The ordination of someone to call them Rebbe. Right? To literally both say what we call smicha. So the Gemara says, so Amalei Abaye Rav Yosef, Mismach Sabi B'Shlosha Minalan. From where do we know that the ordination of rabbis, what we call smicha, which Rabbi say represents the unbroken chain, from Moshe Rabbeinu to Yoshua, so on and so forth? Where do we know that has to take place with 3 people? So Ilema Medichsev Vayismoch Es Yadav Alav. So I'll say maybe it comes from Moshe and Yoshua. Right? The pasuk says that Vayismoch Yis Yadav Alav, that Moshe Rabbeinu placed his hands on Yoshua. And by doing that, almost like he gives him this smicha, he ordains him, he puts him in the position of power. Ihachi tiske bechad. Well, if that's the case, again, Moshe Rabbeinu is 1. So maybe smicha could be done by 1. Maybe you'll say Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe was like a Sanhedrin. So maybe again, if that's the case, then maybe you need a Sanhedrin to convey smicha. Ihachi libay shivim b'chad. It should require 70, 71, right? A Sanhedrin. Kasha. All right, you're right. That's a good question. Omri Rav Ashi. Biyada mamish samchin alei. So first of all, again, it's interesting. So we'll say, Rav says Rav Ashi, one second, when you ordain someone, do you literally place your hands on that person? Everyone says it's like rabbinical ordination, smicha, actually done by placing hands. Amrlei samchina la b'shma. No. Rather, what we do is, again, I will say, we confer a title upon the person. Karilei Rebbe. V'yarvelei reshusa l'meidan dinei knasus. No, rather, again, I will say, how does ordination occur? Now, again, interestingly enough, ordination is still going to have to occur by a group. By a group. How big the group has to be, we'll have to see, but there's definitely a group. But again, although it's called smicha, which means ultimately resting hands on someone, it doesn't actually require a placement of hands. Rather, what is the process of smicha? The process of smicha is a conference of title. We call the person Rebbe, and the person has the ability to go ahead, listen to this. And the person has the right to paskin in the halachos of knessos, the laws of financial penalties. Now, just understand, the laws of knessos are generally considered to be a more complex area of halacha. Why is that? It makes sense, because as opposed to dinei mamanis, supposed to say dinei mamanis, follow logic. Right? Follow logic. I go and I injure Ruvain, so there's a number of different buckets of compensatory damages out there. But those compensatory damages make sense. Lost wages, doctor bills, humiliation, all those things. Knasos, say, right? What are the halachos of knasos? The Torah says you pay X for this, X for that. In other words, it's not mammon, it's knas. So when someone has smicha, they've developed a proficiency to even paskin in halachos of knasos. V'chad lo samech. So the Gemara says, now 1 second, is that true? So the Gemara says, although we may not know how many people you actually need for the basin of smicha, one thing is clear, which is what? It's not one. It's not one. Because remember again, what did the Brisa say? The Brisa said, smicha sekina begimel. Right, smicha, and the smicha of elders has to be done by 3 people. So, but it's clear that halacha l'maisa, you can't do it with 1 people. Can't do it with 1 people. Now, by the way, if you take a look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi says over the meidan dinei knessos. Why does it bring up, like we said before, the laws of the halachos of fines, of knessos, of penalty payments? The Elohim ksiv, the mashma dinei mumchin, v'hainu smuchin. Because we'll say when it comes to laws of knessos, penalty payments, the Torah uses lashon of Elohim. You'll bring it to the Elohim, which means not only a judge, but a judge who is an expert. But in general, in other areas of monetary law, lav dafka that you need an expert judge. Fine. So it's just an interesting idea. By monetary law, you need someone whose profession doesn't have to be an expert. By knossos, you need someone who's an expert. Smicha represents that someone has not only a knowledge but an expertise in halacha. Therefore, you can even paskin dinei knessos. Okay, so we'll say. So now the Gemara says, "But 1 second, is it true that halacha l'maisa, 1 person can't go ahead and convey smicha?" We'll say this is a dramatic story. Rabbi Shmuel Silber, Baram Zachar Osa Ish Latov. This particular man is remembered for good. Who is this man? Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava Shmo. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was his name. I will say an amazingly beautiful and overwhelming Gemara. Shil Malehu, for not Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, Nishtachachu Dinei Knessos mi Yisrael. The laws of Knessos, right, the laws of penalty payments would have been lost from Klal Yisrael. Nishtachachu, they would have been forgotten. Why? Nigrasinu. Why can't you just learn them? Why would they have been forgotten? Ella, both at top of Yudalit, 14a. Ella, Batlu Dinei Knessos mi Yisrael. Rather, Rabbi say the laws of Knessos would have been batal. Now, Rabbi say how so? So, as we just said before, in order for a Beis Din to adjudicate Dinei Knessos, Knas law, the Dayanim have to have smicha. Smicha, right? Classic smicha, the classic process of ordination was again an unbroken chain that started with Moshe and went to Yoshua. The Gemara says, thanks to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, the chain of smicha remained intact. We're not Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, the chain of smicha would have been broken, and therefore, again, one of the manifestations of that would have been there would have been no way to pass in the Knas. We'll say, what happened to Yehuda ben Bava? This is an incredible story that's at least started today. Gemara says, Shepam achos, Gazra Malchus Harasha Gzeira al Yisrael. One time, the evil monarchy, Rabbi said, this is a reference to Rome, made a decree upon the Jewish people. Shekala Somechi Hareg. Rabbi said, whoever confers smicha will be executed. V'chala nismach yehareg. And whoever receives smicha will be executed. V'ir shesomchen ba techarev. And any city in which smicha is conferred will be obliterated. Utchumin shesomchen bahem ye'akru. and any cities within the tchum, within the boundaries of somewhere where smicha was confirmed, will be uprooted. So I'll say, so essentially, now what's happening over here? Why are the Romans so preoccupied with smicha? Because what does smicha represent? Smicha represents the transmission of our Masorah, the transmission of our tradition. What is Rome interested in doing? What are they interested in doing? They're interested in uprooting the Masorah, the tradition of Klal. So remember, I'm going to both say, like the Greeks of Chanukah, the Romans were not interested in our physical annihilation. They were interested in our spiritual annihilation. So therefore they figured, disrupt the Masorah, disrupt smicha, and ultimately, again, you'll under the Jewish rule say, you know what the incredible irony is? And this just shows you something absolutely amazing. We don't have smicha today. We don't have smicha, right? The chain of smicha, I mean, we have smicha. We ordain rabbis, but the smicha that we have today is not the real original smicha. It's more like a zechus, like a remembrance to what was. It's not the actual smicha. But you know what the incredible part is? Smicha has been disrupted. And yet what? We're still here. We're still here. In other words, even if somehow you throw some interference, you disrupt the Masorah of Klal Yisrael in certain ways, you can't stop us. Nothing stops us. Nothing interrupts us. Nothing interferes with the progression of Klal Yisrael. An absolutely overwhelming reality. In any event, the Romans are bent on going ahead and disrupting smicha. So what happened? Ma'as Yehuda ben Bava. What did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do? What was his plan? Now again, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava himself had smicha, and he wanted to ensure that the chain would continue. So what did he do? Halach v'yashav lo bein shnei harim gidolim, ubein shnei ayaros gidolos, ubein shnei techumei Shabbos, bein usha l'shafram. So I'll say what Rabbi Yehuda is fascinating. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava does is essentially he sits between two cities. In other words, he goes in between two mountains. So what's going to happen? The Romans can't uproot mountains. Between two large cities, they can't uproot whole cities. Between two Shabbos boundaries. So essentially what he does is he chooses a geographic location that doesn't put the surrounding population in danger. That's his chap. So the Gemara says, V'samach sham chamisha zekenim. He ordained 5 elders. Who were they? The Eluhain, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua. Those are the 5 elders. For Rav Avya, Mosif af Rab Nechemya. Rav Avya said even Rab Nechemya was included in this as well. So as I said, what happened? This is incredible end to the story. Kevan shikiru oivim bahem. Once the enemies of the Jewish people saw what was happening over here, Amar lahem. So in other words, it was then discovered what was going on, right? It was discovered ultimately again that the Romans were going to go ahead. The Romans discovered what was happening. They saw that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was giving smicha. Sarul lahen. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says, Banai, Rotsu, run away. Amru lo, Rebbe, matehei alecha. Rebbe, if we run, what's going to happen to you? Amar lahen, harini muta lifnechem ke'even she'en lahopchin. Don't worry, they won't get through me. I'll go ahead and protect you. You run, they won't get through me. So, Amru lo zazu misham atshina atsubo shalosh meos lonvios shal barzel v'asua kikavra. So say what happened? Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava stood his ground, and he was pierced literally again with 300 spears. His body was pierced so many times that he became like a sieve. He was pierced so terribly. Rabbi say, but he held his ground. He held the Romans back and allowed these newly ordained Rabbanim to go ahead and escape. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, so we'll say, okay, you know what, there's more to the story. We'll stop over here for today, Rabbi say, but just understand, what an incredibly overwhelming and profound story. So Rabbi say, so first off, this is how the chain of smicha was maintained for Rabbi Yehuda. Now, more about Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava tomorrow. Rabbi say, but just understand the amazing part over here. Jewish history is filled with stories like this. Jewish history is filled with stories of people, of individuals, who are moser nefesh, who engaged in profound self-sacrifice for the good and for the continuity of the Am. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava stood in the face of the approaching Roman army, knowing full well that he was done. Literally, again, killed with 300 spears. Why? To maintain the continuity of smicha, to maintain the continuity of Klal Yisrael. These are the shoulders upon which we stand. These are the people to whom we owe what we have today. Individuals throughout this year. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, we know his name, but there are tens of thousands of others whose names we do not know, but who made this same sacrifice for our people and in whose merit, in whose zechus we are zocha to be here today. And the neshamas of all of those who have been most of nefesh HaKlal Yisrael should have a tremendous aliyah, should have a lichtig Gan Eden, and we should be zocha miras Hashem to make their sacrifice worth it. Let's stop over here for today. Sheyichyeh, everyone.